In the summer of 1942, while Europe burned and the Pacific bled, a formation of 8 American aircraft left the safety of Presque Isle, Maine, heading for the war in England. 6 were P-38 Lightning's twin-engine, fighters with shark-like noses and wings that stretched like blades through the sky. The other 2 were B-17 Flying Fortresses, serving as navigation escorts. Their mission was simple: fly the Great Circle route across Greenland, refuel in Iceland, and then on to Britain. But nothing in war ever stays simple. Somewhere over the endless white of the Greenland ice cap, the weather turned against them. The pilots had been warned about Arctic storms, how they could rise from clear skies in minutes, how the horizon vanished until up and down lost meaning. But training could not prepare anyone for the fury of what came that day. Winds slammed the aircraft like invisible hammers. Snow filled the cockpits. Radios crackled with panic and static. Lieutenant Harry McManus, flying lead in one of the P-38s, shouted over the radio, "I've lost visual. Where the hell is the B-17? No one answered. Lightning II tried to climb above the storm, but its right engine coughed and flamed out. One by one, the pilots realized they could no longer reach Iceland. Their only option was to turn back or die, trying to land on the ice dot at 14,000 feet. Captain Robert Wilson, in the lead B-17, called out coordinates. Find a flat spot and put her down. I repeat, put her down. The order was madness. Greenland's ice wasn't a runway. It was a frozen ocean, riddled with cracks and crevasses deep enough to swallow a building. But when the fuel gauges dipped below empty, they had no choice. The bombers circled once, their massive wings cutting through the blizzard like ghosts. Then one after another, the aircraft bellied into the ice, skidding hundreds of yards before coming to rest in clouds of frozen snow. Miraculously, every man survived. Not a single fatality. 8 aircraft destroyed, but 25 men alive. In war, that counted as victory. For days, they waited on the ice, huddled inside the wrecked fuselages. The temperature plunged to 40 below. Rations ran out. Radios were too weak to reach anyone. When the storm finally cleared, the Arctic sun revealed a white infinity in every direction. Lieutenant McManus wrote in his logbook, "Feels like we landed on the moon. No sound, no wind, just silence so loud it hurts." They used parts of the wrecked planes to build makeshift shelters. The aluminum skins reflected sunlight, giving them warmth during the day and blindness at night. Wilson ordered signal fires, black smoke from burned oil barrels, but the wind tore them apart. For 9 days, they were alone, thinking this was how they'd die, frozen, forgotten, entombed in ice. Then, faint engine sounds came from the west. Rescue, an American coast. Guard PBY Catalina had picked up a weak distress call days earlier. The rescuers dropped supplies, then landed on a nearby glacier ridge. It took another 12 days and 4 separate missions, but every man was eventually pulled out. The planes, however, stayed behind. Buried by snow, sealed by time. Back in the States, the Lost Squadron of Greenland became a headline for a few weeks. A feel-good story in a war that offered few of them. Then, like all things in wartime, the world moved on. New battles replaced old ones. The men were reassigned. The war went on. And the 8 aircraft, 6 P-38s and 2 B-17s, remained entombed. Beneath layers of ice that would grow thicker each winter. No one expected to ever see them again. By 1981. Nearly 40 years later, an aviation enthusiast named Pat Epps was sitting in a small hangar in Atlanta when a friend tossed him an old magazine clipping. The headline read, "Lost Squadron of 42 still under Greenland ice." Most people thought it was just a myth. Epps didn't. He looked at the faded photograph, those planes lined up on the ice, sunlight glaring off their wings, and felt something stir. The idea was insane, but he couldn't shake it. If they landed, they're still there, he told his team. Ice doesn't eat airplanes. It just hides them. And so began one of the strangest treasure hunts in aviation history. Epps and his partner, Richard Taylor, formed an expedition group and raised money from private donors and veterans. Their goal: to find and recover at least one of the aircraft. Using military records, they plotted the approximate coordinates where the pilots had crash-landed in 1942, but the problem was obvious. Glaciers move. Slowly, but constantly, sometimes as much as 50 feet per year. Over 40 years, that meant the planes could have drifted miles from the original location, buried under hundreds of feet of compacted ice. Still, they went. The first expedition reached Greenland in July 1981. It was a desolate, punishing worldwide horizons, freezing wind, and equipment that froze within minutes of exposure. They set up camp and began drilling. Day after day, they hit nothing but solid ice. At 20 feet, 40 feet, 80 feet, still nothing. The local guides told them, "You're wasting your time. The glacier ate your planes." But Epps refused to quit. On the 7th day, one of the drills jammed on something metallic. The crew gathered around the hole, hearts pounding. They melted a camera probe down the shaft, and the image that flickered onto their screen stopped everyone cold. Aluminum. Perfectly preserved. Not a scrap, not a rivet a whole wing. Glinting in the dim green light. They had found them, except it wasn't one plane, it was all of them. Lined up neatly, like soldiers still waiting for orders. Over the following summers, the team returned again and again, each time drilling deeper, melting more ice. Mapping the Lost Squadron, they found the aircraft buried 268 feet below the surface. A frozen time capsule of 1942, cockpits intact, gauges unbroken, machine guns still loaded. It was as if the war had paused mid-sentence and never resumed. One of the P-38s, serial number 417630, would become the heart of the mission. The name given to it decades later, Glacier Girl. By 1983, Pat Epps and his team had become obsessed. The press called them the Ice Cowboys. Every summer they flew back to that same stretch of white nothing in Greenland, fighting weather that could kill a man in minutes. Blizzards wiped out tents. Machinery froze solid. Drills snapped. Each failure cost thousands of dollars and bruised egos. Sponsors pulled out. Even their families started to think they were chasing a ghost. But Epps and his partner Richard Taylor didn't care. They had seen the metal under the ice. They knew the planes were there, and one of them, just one, had to come home. They focused on the P-38 with serial number 417630. The same aircraft Lieutenant Harry McManus had flown in 1942. They called her Glacier Girl. The plan was straightforward on paper and insane in reality. Melt a vertical shaft more than 260 feet deep through solid glacier ice. Reach the aircraft, then cut it into pieces small enough to hoist back up through the tunnel. Each ton of ice they melted cost fuel, time, and human endurance. The Arctic wasn't a museum. It was an executioner that waited for mistakes. In July 1992, after nearly a decade of failed attempts, they returned with new technology. A custom-built thermal probe nicknamed the Super Gopher. It looked like something out of a science fiction film, a 10-foot cylinder that shot out jets of hot glycol to melt ice and descend slowly downward. It worked better than anyone dared hope. After 3 days of continuous melting, the probe broke through to a hollow space. A rush of trapped air blasted up the shaft, smelling faintly of oil and aluminum like a workshop frozen in time. When they lowered a camera down, the view stunned everyone. There she was, a P-38 Lightning, nose buried in blue ice, wings folded slightly, propellers intact, the cockpit glass still clear enough to see the seat harnesses. Even the paint on the tail was visible, faded olive drab with the white star and bar, insignia of the U.S. Army Air Force's dot after 50 years. Glacier Girl was still waiting. They began excavation using steam hoses and hand tools, carving around the fuselage like archaeologists uncovering a pharaoh's tomb. The deeper they went, the more surreal it became. Control panels gleamed under flashlight beams. Ammunition belts lay coiled like snakes. There were pilot goggles, logbooks, even a canteen still half full of frozen water. It wasn't just an airplane. It was a message in a bottle from another world. The team's radio operator, a Vietnam veteran named Bill Stanley, whispered over the intercom. It's like they just walked away yesterday. Piece by piece. They disassembled the aircraft wings first, then tail, then engines. Every part had to be tagged, hoisted up the narrow shaft, and carried to the surface through tunnels of melting ice that could collapse without warning. They worked in shifts around the clock, fighting exhaustion and frostbite. Sometimes they'd hear distant cracks echo through the glacier, reminders that the ice moved constantly, slowly crushing anything caught within it. That by late August 1992. After 49 days of brutal labor, the final section, the cockpit, was lifted to the surface. The sun hit its aluminum skin for the first time since Franklin D. Roosevelt was president. The men stood in silence as the cockpit broke through the ice, steam rising around it like breath from a ghost. Some of them cried. Others just stared. It took months to transport the pieces back to the United States. Customs officials had to classify the cargo as salvaged historical artifact. In reality, it was a resurrection. The parts were shipped to Middlesboro, Kentucky, where a dedicated restoration crew began the painstaking process of rebuilding Glacier Girl to flying condition. They cleaned the Merlin engines, repaired bullet holes, replaced brittle wiring, and rebuilt the wings using original 1942 schematics from North American Aviation. Every rivet, every panel was restored by hand. It wasn't just mechanics, it was devotion. The deeper they went, the more they discovered about the man who had flown her. Among the artifacts recovered from the cockpit was a small leather pouch wrapped in wax paper. Inside was Lieutenant McManus's flight log and a folded sheet of paper, yellowed but still legible. It was a letter, never sent, written in pencil. The top read, "To whoever finds this. We came down hard, but everyone's alive. Wilson says help will come. It's quiet now, too quiet. The engines stopped ticking hours ago. Sometimes I think I can still hear them. If anyone finds this, tell my wife Helen I kept my promise. I brought my crew down alive. If this plane flies again, let her carry that name for me. The sky isn't cruel, it's just honest. It gives nothing it doesn't take back." The crew who found it decided then and there that when the plane flew again, it would bear the name Glacier Girl, but also carry a small inscription below the canopy. For Helen. By October 1999, after nearly a decade of restoration, the impossible happened. Glacier Girl took to the skies again. Piloted by Steve Hinton, a legendary test pilot, she roared down a Kentucky runway under her own power for the first time since 1942. Cameras flashed. Spectators wept. As the twin Allison engines reached full throttle, the sound echoed across the valley a deep, living growl of history reborn. Hinton lifted the nose gently, and for a heartbeat, everyone watching forgot to breathe. The plane climbed, banked, and leveled out perfectly. The polished aluminum reflected the afternoon sun like liquid silver. Over the radio, Hinton's voice cracked with emotion. "She flies smooth," he said. "She flies like she never stopped. Pat Epps stood on the tarmac, tears freezing on his cheeks. Decades of obsession had led to this moment. The world called it a miracle. But Epps just said quietly, "We didn't rescue her. She rescued us." In the years that followed, Glacier Girl became more than an artifact. She toured air shows, visited museums, and became a symbol of persistence, courage, and faith in forgotten dreams. Veterans who had flown over Europe came to see her, touching the metal like a relic from their youth. Some whispered prayers. Others left small notes inside her display case. In 2002, during a maintenance inspection, a small compartment behind the pilot seat was opened for the first time. Inside was a sealed tin box containing a roll of undeveloped film and a single dog tag, H. McManus. The film, once developed, showed the crew posing on the ice in 1942, smiling, freezing, unaware that their images would sleep beneath the glacier for half a century. Today, Glacier Girl still flies. Each takeoff is a defiance of time, a reminder that some machines and some stories refuse to die. The first time Glacier Girl touched the clouds again, people said it felt like history was rewinding itself. But for many, it was more than nostalgia. It was something spiritual. Veterans who had lost friends in the Arctic, engineers who had risked their lives to pull her from the glacier, even young cadets who'd only seen P-38s in textbooks, all of them, watched in silence as the twin engines thundered through the Kentucky sky. That day, time folded on itself. 1942 and 1999 met somewhere above the clouds. But behind the celebration was a question that wouldn't go away. Why her? Why this plane, out of the hundreds lost during the war, refused to disappear? Pat Epps said it best. Some things don't stay buried because they still have something to say. For years after her resurrection, Glacier Girl toured air shows across the country. People lined up for hours just to see her, to touch the cool aluminum, to take photos beside the shark-nosed twin booms that once roared through Nazi skies. Children climbed ladders to peek into the cockpit. Veterans saluted. Pilots called her the sound of courage. Every flight was a reminder that courage doesn't die. It just freezes for a while. But the story didn't end in Kentucky. In 2007, a group of aviation historians decided to retrace the route of the original 1942 Lost Squadron to fly from the U.S. to Greenland and then to England, completing the journey that the original pilots never could. Glacier Girl would lead the formation. The announcement made global headlines. The return to the ice, one newspaper called it. It was more than a flight. It was a mission to finish a promise made half a century ago. The crew prepared for months. Mechanics inspected every bolt, every line. Modern GPS systems were installed discreetly, without disturbing the authenticity of the cockpit. Test flights went perfectly. The engines roared like thunder. Reporters followed the project daily. There was a sense of destiny in the air. On July 22, 2007, Glacier Girl took off from Teterboro, New Jersey, her polished wings gleaming in the morning sun. The plan was to fly to Goose Bay, Labrador, then on to Narsarsuaq, Greenland, exactly the same route as 1942. Dozens of cameras captured the takeoff. The flight was flawless for the first hour. Then, somewhere over Newfoundland, radio chatter reported an unexpected engine temperature rise. The pilot, Steve Hinton, the same man who had flown her maiden flight in 1999, throttled back and made a calm transmission. She's running hot. Might be an oil pressure issue. Minutes later, the right engine sputtered. Hinton made the call. We're turning back. He brought her down safely in Goose Bay. Mechanics swarmed the tarmac, trying to diagnose the issue. It turned out to be a simple mechanical seal failure, nothing serious. But it was enough to delay the Greenland leg. Reporters later joked that even after 65 years, Glacier Girl just didn't want to go back to the ice. the team decided to complete the symbolic part of the journey anyway. Another P-38 took her place for the final leg to England. And on August 1st, 2007, for the first time, the route that had defeated those young pilots in 1942 was finally completed, thanks to a plane that refused to die. After that, Glacier Girl became something more than a museum piece. She became a voice. Her story began to appear in history books, documentaries, even classrooms. Teachers used her to explain courage, engineering, and the strange bond between man and machine. The restoration team was invited to the Smithsonian, where they told the story of how a group of dreamers spent a decade digging through a glacier to resurrect an airplane. No one asked them to save. Every detail of her design the flush rivets. The twin booms, the delicate balance of weight and power, was studied again by young engineers. Many said they joined the Air Force because of her story. It wasn't about nostalgia. It was about what she represented. Resilience. One summer evening in 2012, during a twilight air show in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, Glacier Girl performed her final flight of the season. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon gold. The announcer told the crowd, "Ladies and gentlemen, this aircraft was buried under 268 feet of ice for 50 years. The crowd rose to their feet as the P-38 rolled down the runway. Her engines roared, a sound that no one alive in 1942 could have imagined hearing again. As she lifted off, the golden light reflected off her wings like molten fire in the cockpit. A pilot carried a small folded letter, the same one found under the seat decades earlier. After the flight, he placed it inside a sealed frame next to the aircraft's exhibit plaque. It read simply, "If this plane flies again, let her carry that name for me." And she did. By 2015, the men who had pulled her from the ice had grown old. Pat Epps passed away that year, leaving behind a legacy of pure defiance, a man who believed that stories like this matter because they remind us who we are. His son said at the funeral, "My father spent half his life trying to free a plane from ice." What he didn't realize was that he was freeing people from forgetting. Today, Glacier Girl sits in a temperature-controlled hangar in Middlesboro, Kentucky. Her wings stretch wide, her propellers gleam, and under the canopy, a single pilot's helmet rests on the seat. Visitors still come every week. Veterans leave medals. Children draw pictures. One old man, an Air Corps veteran who had been stationed in Iceland, once stood by her for an hour, just staring. When asked why, he said, "Because she made it home." And that means maybe we all did. Each year, on July 15th, the anniversary of the 1942 landing, the restoration crew powers up her engines for a ceremonial start. When those twin Allisons growl to life, the sound fills the valley like thunder. People stop talking. Some cry. Some record it on their phones. But everyone feels the same thing, respect, because Glacier Girl isn't just a machine that flew again. She's a message, a reminder that even buried under 260 feet of ice, some dreams never die. And as long as her engines roar, the men who risked everything in those frozen skies, McManus Wilson, and all the others will never be forgotten. So if you're watching this right now, take a second and think about that. About the courage it takes to keep digging when the world tells you to stop. About what we owe to those who refuse to quit. And if you believe stories like this still matter, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that history isn't dead. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.